If you're interested in viewing past webinars or registering for upcoming webinars, you can view the entire list with descriptions at learn.examsoft.com/resources. Today's webinar is being recorded, and all attendees and registrants will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording in the next few days. Please feel free to share it among your peers as you would like. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our presenters today. Thank you so much for attending, and please enjoy the webinar.
Hi, Stephanie. Can you hear me okay? I don't know if you had to mute.
We can, okay? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for inviting us on behalf of my colleagues. We're happy to be able to give this presentation today. In addition, Stephanie promised to do cartwheels because we're over about half of the registrants are online, so we're looking forward to that video a little bit later after the talk. So, I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. By the way, I'm Jerry Thrush. I apologize. And I will be leading off this talk, and Scott and Patty will join me a little bit later. So today we're going to talk a bit about how we're using technologies to map our curriculum and also to look at what we're assessing and whether the two map. What we hope for each of our audience members today is that you'll be able to ask this question: are you able to look at what you teach, and does it match up with what you assess? In other words, are you able to generate a gap analysis? Through our talk, we're going to give you a bit of examples of how we've done this, so you can understand a bit of the context and also the technologies that we've used to achieve our gap analysis. After I give some examples, then I'll turn it over to Dr. Scott Helf, who will go through some of the technologies, and also Patty Camberos to basically go step by step of some of the methods we've used to basically achieve our gap analysis. And hopefully, by the end of the talk, you'll understand the importance of a gap analysis and hopefully be able to create a culture of this type of analysis at your own home institution. So we'll start off with the question we had on our campus. It is important to us to determine whether or not our curriculum is mission focused. In addition, besides our college mission, does our curriculum align with our program learning outcomes? We also, in our world, we sometimes call those our core competencies. So that was one question. The second question was, do our assessments also align with the college mission, with the PLOs, with our national board licensing exam topics? So in essence, we're trying to look at both the curriculum and also the assessments to determine the alignment between the two. So I'll give you a couple examples, as I mentioned. Then I will turn it over to Dr. Scott Helf and Patty, who will go through some of the technologies. Scott's going to give you some demos of our data, basically real-time data. And then finally, Patty will wrap things up with some of the future directions that we need to proceed in order to further this type of gap analysis. So starting off with some examples in our world, I feel it's important that you understand a bit about our curriculum. We're a medical school here. Our students are essentially taking all the same courses at the same time for each cohort. So when the first year students come in, they take all the same classes at the same time. So here I've written it's essentially a lockstep curriculum. There's very little variability as students progress through our medical school. In addition, for the courses that I'm going to be speaking about in a little bit, they are all team taught courses. So in order for us to achieve tracking our learning outcomes through the curriculum, in order for us to track our exams and whether or not they align to the particular learning outcomes, we had to have not only course director participation, but essentially participation from all the faculty. And this process was a bit cumbersome at first, as somewhat represented by this picture, where we had to really walk the faculty through the process, but we're now to the stage where on our little wagon we actually have wheels rather than little squares moving along. So let's talk about a couple examples. The first course I want to highlight is essentially our infectious disease course. Doesn't really matter what the class is, but for us it's a course that happens to be about 5 weeks long. It is taught to the first year medical students. This course is essentially lecture-based, so the old-fashioned traditional format lectures to deliver the content to the students, and then essentially multiple choice exams. This particular course has 13 different faculty involved, some of which are adjunct faculty that are off campus. And in order for this gap analysis to work, we essentially had to have all faculty participating in this tagging that we're going to show you in a little bit. So what does it look like? After we've tagged all of our curriculum with the learning outcomes, with the board topics, the licensing board exams, and we've also tagged our assessments, what does the data look like? So in this particular course here, IDIT is this infectious disease course that I referred to from the curriculum map. So looking at the actual content delivered to the students, what are the major topics or disciplines taught in this particular course? So here I've written down board disciplines. That's in reference to our national licensing exams, specifically in this case, the exams that our students take after their second year of medical school. So in this infectious disease course, for any of you that have any background, you would not be too surprised that a significant portion of the course is microbiology, 61%, pharmacology, 23%, pathology, about 16%. So that is in reference to the actual curriculum delivered to the students. What does it look like on our exams? So when we look at our assessments, basically each exam question is tagged with these same learning outcomes, in this case the board topics. And what do we see? And if we look here at the exams, the pie charts look very similar to the curriculum. So here's the curriculum, and then there's the assessment. So what we'd be able to conclude from these two is there's pretty good alignment between what's delivered in the curriculum with what is assessed on the exam with respect to these board topics. We do see, however, here anatomy shows up. It's actually less than 1%, so it's actually not 0. But there was probably 1 or 2 questions on the exam that the faculty member tagged with anatomy. While that was not a primary topic for the course, it still was a discipline that was taught likely in the curriculum, although was not tagged in the curriculum. It was tagged on the assessment. So do we worry about that 1 question or 2 questions? That's up to the faculty to decide. Overall, what I would say for IDIT, pretty good alignment between the two. So our gap analysis in this particular example indicates that we were successful, that the curriculum delivered to the students is in pretty good alignment with the assessments that the students took. Let's go on to the next course as another example. Blood and lymphatics is also a first-year course. It's a little bit shorter than IDIT. It's 3 weeks long. It is the curriculum content is delivered via traditional lectures, so there are some lectures in this course. There's also some independent study work that the students have to do. There are opportunities where students have to work together to complete assignments, so that's their small group work. And then finally, we bring the students back into the classroom for a large group session. Essentially, this course has the traditional lectures along with the problem-based learning format to deliver some of the content. This course, being a little bit smaller, still has 9 faculty and once again, including some adjunct faculty members. What does the gap analysis look like in this particular course? So here we're focusing on the pie chart for the curriculum, and once again looking at the national board topics, and we see that there's a variety of topics taught in this particular course, and for me as a faculty member involved in this particular class, it makes sense to me. What about the assessment? When we look at those same topics for the assessment, for the exams, what we see is there's not as good alignment in this particular course compared to the infectious disease course I showed earlier. So if I go back to the curriculum, notice pretty much each of the pie charts are roughly the same size, give or take. But when we look at the assessment, over half of the exam questions were tagged with pathology, and we see a reduction in most of the other disciplines. So in this particular example, we do see that there appears that the alignment between the two is not as thorough as we saw in IDIT. So this is a flag to us to now analyze whether or not, there's an issue with the assessments. Are the faculty truly tagging the questions more pathology than other topics, or are they, mistagging the particular question? Should have been tagged something else? That we haven't analyzed yet, but we can definitely say that when we look at the two, there is a gap between the curriculum delivered and the assessment. Let's take a look at another example. This is still for the blood and lymphatics course, but instead of using the licensing exam topics, we're going to use our program learning outcomes. For us, there are 7 different program learning outcomes. In this particular course, for the curriculum, we focus the content around medical knowledge, 57%, and about 43% in patient care. What do the exams look like with respect to the program learning outcomes? Big difference there. So once again, going back to the curriculum, somewhat split between the two, but the assessments are heavily focused on medical knowledge. So once again, a key indication to us that there is a disconnect or an apparent disconnect between the curriculum that's delivered to the students and the actual assessments. One last example we'll look at is now let's take a look at the entire first 2 years of the medical school education. We call these the pre-clerkship years. And if we're looking at the curriculum, and once again looking at the program learning outcomes, we can see that in these first 2 years of medical school, we do spend a lot of time on medical knowledge, a little bit over half. That, to me, makes sense. And not as much time on some of the other program learning outcomes. So that's the curriculum delivered. What do the assessments look like? Big difference there, big gap. So once again, we see that there's a large focus on the exams or on the assessments, focusing on medical knowledge, and very low amounts of exam questions, essentially, from these other program learning outcomes. So the gap is pretty big when we look at the entire first 2 years of the curriculum. So unfortunately, we're concerned that whether or not the students will think, okay, you're teaching one thing, but you're assessing another. So when I ran across this particular cartoon, I thought it was pretty funny and also related to what we're seeing, which is not a funny situation. We certainly do not intend to teach the students one thing and assess them on something different, but the data seems to indicate that may actually be what we're doing. So in order to see how did we do this tagging, how did we develop the gap analysis, I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Scott Helf to continue on with this discussion about the technologies we've used.
All right, thanks, Jared. So how did we get to where we are? How did we do this analysis, et cetera? So our hope is not that you get discouraged because we have some rare technology that you'll never be able to have. I know I get really frustrated when I hear talks where people are like, aren't we great, we developed this technology and you don't have it, too bad, so sad. Our idea is actually that you can do the same. So as you're looking at what we're doing, just think about how you can actually do the same create the same sort of technologies, and we'd be happy to help you with that too if you have any questions. So the first thing I want to talk about is we have this thing called the Academic Progress Portal. And basically what we're traditionally doing is stuffing a bunch of information into this portal that were the traditional or the usual suspects. So what I have here is a screenshot of the what we call the student snapshot page of our Academic Progress Portal. And you can see we have all sorts of information on the student. We have all of their demographics, their admissions data, where they are going to residency, every single test score that they've ever taken, every single exam grade, every single score for an entire course, as well as the board scores. And I'm just zooming in on that a little bit here. This is the traditional stuff we all have access to. It's just we happen to have an Academic Progress Portal where we put it all into one place, kind of like a Facebook page. You might call it stalking, but that's what we do. We know everything about every student at every moment, at a moment's notice, 24/7 through a web interface. So it's something we invented here on campus and has proved very successful. But this is kind of boring, we're just looking at exam scores. That's old school. I mean, I can see that students are doing, well on one exam versus another exam versus how they're doing compared to their colleagues. The other thing we do is the board scores. So the COMLEX is the Comprehensive Osteopathic Medical Licensing Exam. To become a physician, an osteopathic physician, you must pass these exams. And actually, to graduate from our program, you must pass these exams. So we track all that information. That is what I call auto-magically uploaded from the national boards. We go and get that data nightly with some scripts, etc. And we do the same for the United States Medical Licensing Exam. Now, we graduate doctors of osteopathic medicine, but they're also welcome to take the United States Medical Licensing Exam along with their MD colleagues. They're not required to, but some choose to become, in their own minds anyway, more competitive for residencies. So we also go out and automatically get that data from the National Board of Medical Licensure folks. And then what was kind of frustrating to me as a faculty advisor is when students went on rotations, I just kind of lost track of them. It was impossible to keep track of them. So again, we grab all that data from our partners at New Innovations. as well as some of our on-campus partners, the DO database, etc. And we pull that data to the academic progress portal. But again, you see that we're sort of looking at the traditional stuff. Did they pass their rotations? How did they do on particular exams, such as the Shelf and OSCE, which I won't go into details what those are. It doesn't matter. The point is that we're just looking at traditional stuff. But what about learner outcomes? So I know what % score you got in anatomy. I know what % score you got in a course like IDIT. But what about learner outcomes? So what we had to do was create a system that basically, is this the part where I'm still talking?
Yeah, I was going to get the hook and pull you back.
Right. So this is now Patty's turn. I'm going to shut up now and let Patty talk. Patty, you talk.
All right, I'll do that. Hi, everybody. So let's go back a little bit. Back to learner outcomes. The APP is super impressive, and it kills when we talk at conferences and when we do demos. Everyone's really impressed by it. But, I mean, is there more that we can be doing for these students? Absolutely. And with our implementation of ExamSoft, we quickly realized that we could tag an unlimited amount of categories per exam item. So not only did we want to give the students and their mentors, the people that are there to help the student success, we're able to not only give them the full exam result, but we're able to break the exam apart and look at board outcomes, how they're doing in each of those categories, by program outcomes, even course outcomes. So we're able to help the students before the course is even finished. They can take that first exam, and then we can look at the course outcomes and help them and catch them before they fail. But how do we do that with all of these faculty members? Dr. Thrush, well, Jerry was explaining that we have team-taught courses. How can we ensure that all of these faculty members are tagging the questions using that same theme of categorization? I like to consider myself a pretty charismatic person. It gets me out of traffic tickets sometimes, but there's no amount of charm that I can use to convince these faculty members or even corral them into using that same theme. So instead of asking nicely, we used brute force, right? No, that's not what we do. We gently corral the faculty members into a unified process that is both efficient for the faculty members as well as the staff members. What we did is we used a mashup of ExamSoft and SharePoint. So what we did is the faculty members do not go into ExamSoft to submit their exam questions. They do so on an online web form that we created in SharePoint. And in that web form, we're asking for the question title, answer choices, the correct answer, but we're also asking them, what lecture did this come from? Who are you? What faculty member is this? What are the ILOs, the program learning outcomes, the course outcomes for this exam question? What board categories are you assessing here? It's all faculty entry, and what makes it easy is we're using a controlled vocabulary. Then what we do is we take all that information and we put it into ExamSoft. And for that, you might want to get some popcorn for this. We have a short video to show you what this technology mashup does for us.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs. Now that's another thing altogether. Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. If you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know? You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do. I wouldn't do nothing else. It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost to one of them, you ain't feeling like in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of the digital.
So that's all in good fun, but really what we're doing is we're trying to help the faculty and the staff. We're trying to maximize what we're able to do in ExamSoft as far as the categorization. And in using this form, what we're doing is we're guiding the faculty members and only showing them the categories that they need to submit their exam question.
and get them in and out as quickly as possible so they can go on to their other duties. And the same goes for the staff members. It's all in an organized place. All the editing is done in a peer sharing environment, and the export and import is as easy as possible. So what I've done is taken a few snapshots of our form so that you get an idea of what it looks like. Right here, of course, the faculty member just types in the item title or the item description, as it's called in ExamSoft. They can attach attachments here. They can put in videos, audio files, multiple images if that's what's necessary. And then they choose a question type. And when they choose multiple choice, they can enter their question text and then answer choices A through J. If they change this to essay, those answer choices go away. So the form displays only what they need in order to submit their exam question. And then you see this is what I'm talking about by a controlled vocabulary. For the lecture title, which is actually a category for us, it's a drop-down menu. And we do that for two reasons. It's ease of use for the faculty member, so they don't have to go and shuffle through a bunch of emails trying to find their lecture titles, and then they don't have to type all that in. And it's good for the staff member as well because it keeps all of the data clean for the import of the categories. Because you can imagine if I had 3 questions and I had to submit them for this delirium lecture, as a faculty member, if I had to type that in, I would probably put delirium, and then with a capital D, and then delirium space, and then for the next question to be probably geriatrics space delirium. If I'm doing that and I'm exporting the questions and then importing them into ExamSoft, that's going to create 3 different categories. By controlling the vocabulary and giving them a drop-down menu, it ensures that every exam question for that lecture or for that exercise is tagged correctly and they're all being measured together. So you see another category we have here is instructor, and then they enter their question text, they give us their correct answer, they let us know whether they want to randomize the choices, whether this is a grouped question, and then here at the bottom is when they realize that they are legit categorizing this question. This is where we're just upfront asking them, what are the institutional outcomes that you're measuring on this assessment question? What are the program outcomes, the board categories, the course outcomes? And then, of course, those are all drop-down menus as well. So what I did is I expanded the boards LO, and you can see that this is all a drop-down menu. They don't have to go and look through a bunch of lists. It's all there for them. It's just a click of the drop-down and then selecting your category. So once all the faculty members have submitted their exam questions, all I do is export from Excel in SharePoint, and it'll give me an exact replica of the ExamSoft import schema needed to import using a TXT file. And then what that does is it concatenates all of the categories. So with a quick import and export backwards, export and then import, we have all the questions categorized, and then all you have to do is attach your images or audio files. Oops, too far. So we've created the exam, and the students have taken that assessment. What we do next then is export the longitudinal data as well as the exam results, but we get the longitudinal report so that we're able to pull those outcomes, and then we post them into the academic progress portal along with the regular exam results. So now what happens is we have the APP, but now it's improved with overall learner outcomes. So you see here, I just happened to pull the program learning outcomes, and you can see that the student is able to see their performance here with the class average. And then so that they can properly interpret these results, we gave them the number of questions attached. And you can see here that we're seeing that same, what's the word I'm looking for? The same pattern that we were able to see in those embarrassing pie charts. So we see how this information helps the students on an individual basis and how they can compare their results to the class. But what do we do about improving the course, improving faculty performance? And for that, I'm going to give this back to Dr. Held.
Okay, thanks, Patty.
So you can talk about the curriculum now.
Sure. So now we see the performance on a per student basis, but how do we know how faculty are doing? How do we know how we're doing on a course? So for that, we needed to create sort of another technology that you're going to notice looks a lot like the question submission form. So what we decided was, and I know this never happens at your institution, but at our institution we have the potential for having a course management system, a learning management system, a separate curriculum calendar, ExamSoft. It could get pretty crazy with all the technologies. So we decided we would put them all together. Our learning management system, our course management system, and our curriculum calendar are all wrapped up into one solution that we created, again, using our friend SharePoint. And the reason for this is the faculty and staff enter the data once, and that's it. If they enter a lecture, it goes straight into the calendar, it goes into the curriculum management system, and it goes into the learning management system all at once. So there's no triplicate entry, and there's no possibility of ambiguity about what we're talking about, and whether, lecture 1 is called anatomy or it's called anatomy, dissection of the lower leg. So all of our solutions are designed to actually make life easier on faculty and staff, and that way we actually end up getting 100% compliance from the faculty and staff, because the solutions that we offer actually make their lives easier by design. It's not by accident. So there's really no reason for the culture not to change. So we don't try and force a cultural change. We offer opportunities that make the world a better place, and people tend to like that. So just a quick example, our curriculum calendar looks like any old calendar in SharePoint, and you'll notice that we have these lectures, or actually learning activities is a better term, that are entered into that calendar by the staff. So the faculty don't have to do that. All the faculty have to do is click on the thing that is their responsibility, and in this case, only the faculty can edit that item, the faculty or the staff. So even though everybody sees this calendar, only faculties who own, for example, that particular lecture or learning activity have the permission to actually edit that particular item. So that's kind of neat. And when they go in, the only thing that they can actually type with their quick little fingers is the title. That's it. The other things they have to do with a drop-down menu. So, for example, when they pick a course that this is associated with, that's already pre-typed, and they can select it. And same with things like the medical subject headings. Medical subject headings, for those of you who don't know, also known as the MESH terms, are the National Library of Medicine's classification of medical topics. There are about 30,000 of them, and this is a list that we ask our faculty to basically pick from, but it's an autofill. So it's a lot like when you go to Netflix or you go to Amazon, you start typing, or even Google, it sort of auto-completes. If you type in a term that doesn't exist in the library, then it won't take it. So again, this is a way of us standardizing the lexicon and standardizing the vocabulary that our faculty are using. Occasionally, faculty will complain that they can't find the term they're looking for, but if they Google something called Mesh on Demand and type in the words that they're using, there's actually a natural language processing that will give them the term. So there is only one term for hemangioma. We don't call it a blood cancer. We don't call it anything like that. Or angioedema. Angioedema, there's only one term for that. It's not bruising. It's not swelling. It's angioedema. So there's absolutely no ambiguity when we talk about what a nevus is. For those of you who aren't medical, a nevus is a mole. So some people call it a mole, a birthmark, a nevus. There's only one term for it, nevus, period, end of story. If you don't know what the term nevus is, you go into Mesh on Demand, you type in mole, and then get your term. And then also we have checkboxes. So again, for the categories, institutional categories in this particular case, you can pick more than one, but you have to select at least one. And again, we make it super easy for the faculty. It takes less than 5 minutes for them to actually tag all of their items, actually even less than that. Again, and the recurring theme here is controlled vocabulary. At no point are faculty allowed to make up words or, not check off boxes, etc. They must tag everything. And then what they get in return is something that, what could possibly go wrong. I'm going to try and do a little demo here. When we get all that data together then, what we get is something like this, which I will pull over here, and hopefully you can see this okay. This is nothing more really, if you think about it, than an Excel file that I've put all of the data in. So we have all of this data that we pull out of SharePoint. Literally, we just export into Excel. Okay, so nothing magical here. Then I do a little bit of counting and such, but at the end of the day, I literally do just a pivot table. And this pivot table is kind of magic because it allows us to see things in a way that we weren't able to before. So remember, we were talking about the blood lymphatic system. We could have easily been talking about the cardiovascular system, but I'm going to pick on blood lymphatics. And when you click on this, I'm just going to zoom in just a smidge more here. You can see we instantly get a breakdown in this particular case of of our board learning outcomes. So, and that's shown here. Now, I can also do it by, you know, ILOs or PLOs or NBOME. NBOME, again, is National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners. So for any of these categories, I can do these pivots. And not only can I pivot on the course, but as I promised, we can pick on particular faculty. So I'm going to do that now because Jerry is one of our targets. So you can see that this course is taught by multiple folks, as Jerry mentioned, and I can actually pick on particular faculty. And it turns out that Jerry actually has a pretty balanced pie chart here of different topics. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but that we know. And if I click on someone like Dr. Parza, who's our pathologist, we see that he, probably rightly so, focuses 100% on pathology. Dr. Walters is he's a physiologist, pharmacologist. He's a pharmacologist, so he talks about pharmacology, not surprising. Dr. May is an anatomist. John Mata is a pharmacologist, and so on. And Dr. Patel is actually a physician, and you can see that she focuses equally on pathology, pharmacology, and micro. And again, you can actually see that the addition and subtraction of all of that. So that's nice. We can actually look at what are people teaching, but what are they testing. So I'm going to pull up a separate file for that. And again, this is nothing more than we took our ExamSoft data, exported it out, you know, a flat file right here, very simple. And actually, this one's a little bit more elegant than the last one I showed you. The data is actually simpler, but I have learning outcomes tagged by type. So once I've done that, again, I can do, you know, a not so clever pivot table. It turns out it's not that difficult, and I can again look at institutional learning outcomes. I can look at board learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, all instantaneously for either the entire curriculum or a particular course. If I wanted to do the entire curriculum, I literally would just unselect the particular course. These are our NBOME learning outcomes as tagged in our course, all of our courses. But again, I can pick up blood and lymphatics. And here we see, again, where pathology absolutely dominates. Remember, before it was a very, very nice and even pie chart, but now you're seeing pathology was dominating. And we can actually go in and find out why. So remember how Jerry was so balanced in his teaching? Let's see about his testing. It turns out it's all Jerry's fault. Now, either Jerry is not appropriately tagging or there's some problem with our tagging system, but this is just an example of how we can say, hey, Jerry, thanks for the webinar, but it's all your fault that we're not, you know. And this is all in tongue-in-cheek, but this is actually a really good opportunity for us to find out what happened. Did we tag the question wrong? Was there something wrong in the way that our technology was allowing us to tag? In this case, it turns out that the faculty were forced to tag one item on the exam, right. But in the curriculum map, they were allowed to tag multiple items. So that was part of the problem, which has been corrected. But there are instances in which case there actually is an imbalance between what faculty are tagging versus, for the curriculum map versus what they're actually, in other words, what they're tagging for what they say they're teaching and what they're actually testing. And as you can tell, Ronald Reagan right now is laughing in his grave about how we don't actually test what we teach. And so I've already done the demo. So the point here is that if you have first learner outcomes through ExamSoft, and then you construct a curriculum map, you can simply subtract the two, and that is how you get your real-time assessment, or what we call delta gap analysis. The key is that you have to use the same vocabulary and lexicon for both, and once you have that, then you're able to do this sort of assessment very easily, which I showed. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Patty to wrap it up.
Sweet, no hook needed this time. Okay, so now we have all of this data, right? Now what? It kind of reminds me when I go shopping and I buy a bunch of stuff and I just lay it out and just look at it. I've got all this stuff, now what do I do? So the first thing that we want to do is fix those known gaps that we see in the pre-clerkship or the first 2 years of medical education. And the way we do that is we take the student performance and the assessment, and then we take the data that we have from the curriculum map and the counting, and we give it to our curriculum committee. And there, a committee along with the course director is able to look at the distribution and see if it makes sense and make improvements if it's not, or if it doesn't make sense, or improvements either way. And the next thing that you saw, we saw it in the students' snapshot of the PLOs, and we also saw this in the pie charts, that we were really lacking in clinical education, clinical exercises, and for professionalism. Well, part of the disconnect that we're seeing is we didn't have a proper way for assessing subjective exams, like poster presentations, essays, clinical exercises. But since the implementation of rubrics, what we've been able to do is grade those subjective exercises using the same category themes that we're using in our objective exams. And so that is how we're beginning to mine those gaps there. Now, moving forward, what we'd like to do is find those unknown gaps in the clerkship or in the 3rd and 4th year of medical education. And what we want to do is take all of the knowledge that we've learned in auditing the first 2 years and take on those challenges because our students are spread across the country and each of their experiences are different. So it'll have its own set of challenges, but hopefully we'll have a new presentation next year showing how we accomplished all of that. So with that, we open up for question and answers. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. As Patty said, we're going to go ahead and open the forum up for questions. So if you do have questions for Patricia, Dr. Health, or Dr. Thrush, now is the time to add them into the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll go ahead and read them out, and then the presenters will have a chance to respond now. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. We already have a couple waiting. First question is, how did you get the percentage representation in the curriculum delivered?
So the percentage representation is based on the tags. So as Scott was showing, when a faculty member enters in their learning activity and tags it, we basically consider each tag as an entity. It's not considered an hour, half hour, etc. It's just a tag. And so when we look at the entire course, let's say there's 100 lectures or 100 learning activities, we would then count up the percentage of time that a faculty member would tag a particular item, for example, microbiology. So in that course of, let's say, 100 hours, 63% of the time faculty tag microbiology. So it's simply a tag of when faculty identify it, not based on solely on time.
It's a frequency counter. So in this example, let's say we had 100 learning activities and 1,000 tags were applied, then the percentage is simply a proportion of how many of those tags were anatomy, how many of those tags were pathology. So as Jerry said, it's not explicitly time sensitive. It's basically a frequency count for both the exams and for the curriculum.
Great, thanks. The next question is, and you guys be gentle with the answer on this one, what is the disadvantage of having faculty do this in ExamSoft?
For us, well, I can answer it why we made that initial...
Can I just say one word?
Go ahead.
Chaos.
so to try to avoid chaos, one thing we saw, 6, 7 years ago, we were using a learning management system. And in this learning management system, faculty were able to go in and post their PowerPoints, their Word documents, etc. And in that particular learning management system, you basically uploaded all faculty into that particular course. And unfortunately for us, on multiple occasions, we have had faculty delete entire courses and delete everything, every document posted by every faculty member in that course. That cannot happen with our exams. And so in order to control for that, thanks to Patty and also Scott's team, came up with a way to enter it into SharePoint. And also keep in mind that Patty alluded to, SharePoint will force the faculty to have to tag, whereas ExamSoft does not. So we chose not to have faculty in ExamSoft in order to, for us, protect the database. And also we use SharePoint because we had to make sure faculty were tagging. So that was basically the decision. Anything else?
Right.
Yeah. So, and we also had the advantage of one of our colleges actually does allow faculty to go in and tag in ExamSoft, and their data is frankly useless because of the things that Patty talked about. They tag things in an inconsistent way, right. So it is impossible for them to do the sort of analysis that we do. And I would also argue that our interface, no offense to you guys, ExamSoft, you're hosting this, but our SharePoint interface by design is very, very easy to use, much simpler than ExamSoft. There is no training necessary for it. You go into the web form and you just enter in your data. It certainly makes the job of the exam creator or the exam assessment specialist, I don't know, 100 times easier. I don't know. I'll let Patty
Coming from like a staff perspective, when we started this process, I was the assessment specialist. I was the one putting these exams together. Using this interface did a lot for us. One, it does force the faculty, and it's not even that they're doing it on purpose. They're not doing it to be mean or to be difficult, but man, you're asking me to tag an ILO, at least one ILO, one PLO, one course outcome. You want me to mark that I'm a faculty member. You want me to mark that it's microbiology and that's pharmacology, that it's anatomy. On top of that, you want me to tell you what lecture this came from? It's asking a lot for them, so we have to put it in an organized way so that it's, hey, can I have this information? Now I need this information. And I'm only showing them the categories that they need to fill this, to submit this exam question. We're not asking for anything more or anything less, but we do try to make it easy on them. And then those required fields, so even if they missed it by accident, the form will say, hey, hi, you forgot to enter an institutional outcome, at least one. So, I mean, it helps us in doing that because everybody knows how hectic exam creation gets, and they're edits down to the wire. So if I have to ask a faculty member, Dr. Thrush, Dr. Health, are you done with your edits? By the way, I still need an ILO for questions 15, 57, 38, and 103. And what you end up doing is you push the exam out, never fully categorizing those exams because it's just, you're getting hit exam after exam after exam. You got to get those exams out. So if you get it done right the first time, it's just one and done. The question is submitted, all of the categories are accounted for, and you make that export, you import into ExamSoft, and you create your exam.
So the one thing is, two things that are really important also that they touched on. One is that the faculty they must fill out one each of the categories of institutional learning outcome, program learning outcome, course learning outcome, and board learning outcome. In ExamSoft, there's no way to enforce that rule.
Right.
So with the web form, if I forgot to click on a course learning outcome, it's going to pop up and say, hey, you forgot a course learning outcome. Or if I didn't enter a mesh term, it would say, hey, you didn't enter a mesh term. You need to enter a mesh term. The second thing that we didn't really show is when faculty are creating this exam in SharePoint, they can see each other's test questions, and they actually they can't edit each other's questions. They can.
You can set the permissions so that they can or they can't.
Right. So we can set the permissions like I can read Dr. Thrush's questions, but I can't edit them, or maybe I can edit them. In any case, it gives us a platform to easily collaborate, and that's a whole other talk. But that again, I think, is more elegant. And no offense to ExamSoft, what it does is excellent. That's why it's a mashup. We use what's excellent about ExamSoft. We exploit it to what we believe is its fullest.
Right.
I like to call it, we hack it. There's some fun things that we do with it. And then same with SharePoint, and same with Excel. And these are all tools that are at your disposal right now.
Right.
And then the last thing I'll say with respect to why we can get away with this format of having SharePoint ExamSoft, our exams are actually created by the staff in my office.
Right.
The individual faculty don't generate their own exams. They generate the questions, but the exam is actually constructed within the Office of Academic Affairs. So that's certainly something that's different than if you were a faculty member running your own course, running your own exams, then it could be done in ExamSoft because you only have one person involved. But once you go beyond that number of one, then it gets much more challenging. And for us, with one of our largest classes has 25 faculty involved, and I think about half of which are off-campus faculty. We need to come up with a system that was easy, as Scott alluded to, and that would allow us to generate the information that we need to do our gap analysis.
That's a really good point. Forgot about that.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, that wasn't too bad. I appreciate it. We have a bunch of questions coming in. We're going to try and get to all of them. Next question is, and this is a little bit of a follow-up to the last one, since faculty do not have access to ExamSoft, how do they view the questions that were added to the banks in previous years?
Patty,
Ooh.
great.
That's a whole nother talk. Oh
That
yeah.
is.
Can you do it in
I have a ticket into the ExamSoft community board. What they do, we do several things. What I do is, or what I did was, I exported the item analysis, and there is a document library in SharePoint for each of the courses, so they can look at the performance of past exam questions. But also, what I've done is I've exported the exam items with their performance and the question in its entirety, and I created mini item banks in SharePoint per course, and they can very easily query the item bank and add that question to the new exam.
Yeah, it's beautiful because the faculty's looking at the past data. They can see how students perform. They can say, yeah, I want to reuse this question. They pull the ID, type that into the SharePoint site, and then the question populates itself, so the faculty doesn't have to type everything in again.
And importantly, I said to Patty 18 months ago, don't do it, it's way too hard. And so she did it anyway.
Because that's how I do.
And on her own, and created this in SharePoint, and it's gorgeous. So I can go in as a faculty member, query a particular question type, and I can see, just like in ExamSoft, I can see, the point by serial, I can see the difficulty index, all of that stuff. And if I decide to change the question, it'll actually create a new question ID on the fly, which will automatically import into ExamSoft. So again, we're exploiting where ExamSoft is really strong. It did all the analysis for us.
Right.
We just export that data into our data bank that then faculty have limited access to.
Right. It is quite a bit more work to do it like this, and that's why I have that ticket into the ExamSoft community board. What I'd like to see is just being able to export the exam items with the questions. Currently, I have to do it per exam. So there's that.
Or that might be another hacking trick we can do. If they're not going to give us that API, maybe we can just create our own solution.
Next question.
We wouldn't do that. We would never do that.
Yeah, let's move on. Next question is, please elaborate more on your assessment measures for the non-cognitive elements like professionalism and communication.
Absolutely. So, for example, students, for communication, let's talk about that one. Our students have a simulated patient experience. We call it standardized patient, and this experience is observed. It's also videotaped. So a faculty member, in watching the student either live or through the video feed, would use the rubrics from ExamSoft and be able to tag. So the faculty would decide, well, what am I looking at? If I'm looking at communication, what aspects of communication might I be looking at? How would I grade the student on this rubric scale? So it's basically click of the button. And you can do that essentially for any of these behaviors for practical exams. So for the behaviors, the non-cognitives, basically we're exploiting the rubrics feature of ExamSoft to be able to do that. Process is basically the same.
And just importantly, the first 2 years of medical school typically are very heavily weighted on medical knowledge and cognitive abilities. More and more people are trying to develop those non-cognitive competencies in the first 2 years of medical school. Having said that, the 3rd and 4th years of medical school typically are where students are out on clerkships. It could be argued that that's probably where the formation of professional identity is happening there, and that is absolutely one of our gaps that we are having a challenge to get our minds around how we can actually do that in an effective way. And the reason is our faculty, what am I trying to say, assessments of the students in the clinical years really has no discriminatory index. So we first need to find something that is discriminatory and then apply those non-cognitive competencies on top of that. So that's an excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
And a work in progress.
Yes.
Definitely.
Next question is, besides ease of use of the system, what other means do you use to attract faculty buy-in?
Yeah,
you can't submit your test question.
That's where the brute force comes in.
Actually, so really this process was a whole process. We started off with the exam questions. So curriculum mapping was a later feature. So we started off with exam questions, and what we did, Patty and I would meet with faculty of a course, so it's a bit of divide and conquer.
Yes.
So you have the faculty in that course, we show them the site, we work with them on how to use it, and then you get some grumbling at that point. Once you show the faculty the data, that's all it took. So when we showed the faculty, oh look, so this student is getting, it's basically, let's say an A student, a student getting honors in all courses. But when we could show the data and say, aha, the student who's honors in everything is doing poorly or below the class average, let's say in pharmacology, we would have never have had that data before. That information is critical for faculty to understand. And once they started seeing the data, that's all it took. So we basically trained the faculty for the exam question submission. And then when we added on curriculum mapping later, it was the same format, the same process, the same vocabulary. That was pretty easy. So we started off divide and conquer, show the data, go back and keep showing the faculty the data. And for us, I think that's all it took.
There were a couple other things also. Before we started this process in SharePoint, I was getting exam questions via email, via fax. People were leaving Post-its on my desk like, hey, Patty, this question named da-da-da-da, please edit, blah, blah, blah. Just edit all over my desk. Stuff was being missed. Questions were not being added because they were last minute. And what this has done is created a unified process, and it keeps the faculty accountable, and it gives the course director a tool to be able to manage the exam as it's being created. That, I think, is invaluable. There's a little bit of peer pressure, too, there, because then a course director can say, hey, Dr. Thrush, Dr. Help, I have everybody's exam questions. We're just waiting on yours. Because what would happen before this process is a faculty member would walk into my office and say, hey, Patty, I know you're working on the exam. I've got 3 more questions. I'll get them to you later. And then another faculty member comes in. They're thinking they're the only one I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for half the faculty members. Right. And they think they're the only exception that I'm making.
Well, the other faculty can see that the other faculty haven't submitted
now,
questions.
But before that was not the case. So there is a little bit of peer pressure, and it helps in the assessment assessment improvement and just the quality of these exam questions now. Now we're having editing meetings beforehand in SharePoint, and so the quality of the exam questions are improved drastically. Because the thing that's embarrassing for me, I would try to catch all of these grammatical errors, but it's embarrassing to be a medical university and for a faculty member not to use a proper there, or there. It's embarrassing. Even those simple errors, a student looks at this and says, did you guys just throw this together an hour ago? Well, as a matter of fact, we did.
Yeah. the other thing, too, that's really important is students come up to me all the time and they say, oh, man, I'm so glad we can track these longitudinal things. Because there are students, like Jerry says, that are, doing great or doing average, which is in medical school doing average is actually doing great. But they're profoundly weak in a particular area that would have gone undetected before. So the student and the faculty advisor, and all of us faculty are also advisors of the students. So we see the world through their eyes, and we realize, wow, if I was a medical student, this would be tremendously valuable for me to bone up on whatever I'm lacking for the boards or just to be a better doctor. That's sort of after the faculty have started doing it. So it's one of those self-perpetuating and self-reinforcing systems. Once you get the ball rolling, it seems to just start rolling faster and faster on its own.
One thing that I did mention, though, during EAC that we haven't mentioned yet is Dr. Thrush did say that in the beginning there was a little bit of grumbling with that core group of faculty members that we started with. Another thing that really helped is when we created this form, we kind of added all the bells and whistles that we would love for the faculty to submit as far as information or data. And we were asking things like, what time was your lecture? How long was your lecture? What phase was the moon in during the time of your lecture? And the faculty members looked at this and they said, this is impossible, this is crazy. I'll answer this, this, and this, but you're going to have to take this off. This field has to go. And then it was accidental. It's not like a thing that we intentionally did to manipulate. Scott may have. Scott, he's a genius.
I did intentionally put stuff in there.
Yeah.
It's classic negotiation. Is you put things on the table that you don't care about. You get them arguing about the things that don't matter to either of you, and that forces the conversation. Not forces. That encourages that shifts. Fine. That shifts the conversation to the core things that matter, like what lecture is this? ILOs, PLOs. Obviously, we can drive the time and that sort of thing. So that was something that I did put on the table purposefully, so that I would have things to negotiate away, so that they wouldn't negotiate away the things that actually matter.
Then the conversation shifts from are we doing this, are we not doing this,
Right.
it's how much of this are we doing.
When you go and buy a car, they say, what color car do you want, right? What color car do you want?
You've already purchased the car.
So we're not even talking about whether you want the car or not, and that's just negotiation. And I think it's not really manipulation, it's just sales techniques that are effective. And
Manipulation with good intention.
sure, right. but if you're not a good salesman, you're going to have a hard time selling your ideas.
And
So.
I think it's this group as well, having a unified front, Dr.
Right.
Thrush being the champion of the faculty member, Scott being the evil tech genius, and me batting my eyes.
I'm sorry,
did
I'm
you
just evil.
Yeah, okay. And then it's me being more, I don't know, customer service.
Yeah.
Going in and putting out the small fires, faculty member, I can't get into the link, and how can we fix this? And this needs to be a little more efficient. And then I'd go into the forum and try to improve it, and then go back to the faculty members and ask them if it was okay, if it's improved, if, I'd go over and sit with the faculty members and help them answer their exam questions until they didn't need me anymore. And now it's just second nature.
It's now a habit. We've
Right.
been doing this for a number of years now, so it's working pretty smoothly.
All right, next question. How standardized are the questions when you have several people teaching a module and theoretically submitting questions?
Great question. So what we've done more recently, Patty alluded to this, we now have pre-exam meetings where all the faculty of the course get together in a room and they review all the questions. The point is to improve the quality of the question, number one, to ensure that we're not asking the same question twice unless we want to do that.
Right.
And for each faculty to know what the other faculty member's teaching and assessing. So it's a way to open that dialogue. And we've been doing this now since last year. We started this last year, and it's actually worked really well.
Yeah.
So faculty get together on SharePoint. They can edit the questions in that database and then submit it off to the Office of Academic Affairs for construction into ExamSoft. So it's all about getting the faculty together and reviewing the exams. And as I said, we've been doing it for a year, and the quality has absolutely improved.
They're really helpful in those last-minute edits because we have these planning meetings or the proofing meetings. The deadline is set, like a
So
week or two ahead. It's
actually,
no more last-minute questions right
right
before the exam is to be posted. That doesn't happen anymore.
Right. And actually, that's a good point. It's actually 3 weeks. 3 weeks before the exam is to be deployed, faculty are to submit their questions. 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks before the exam is deployed, faculty get together in those meetings, such that gives the Office of Academic Affairs about a week or so to generate the exam, to send it back to the course director and or faculty for final edits. And that's hard. For the Blood and Lymphatics course that's only 3 weeks long, essentially all the exam questions are submitted before the first day of class.
We started in baby steps too, and little by little, gently, we started pushing that deadline further and further back. We started at a week,
Yes.
then 2 weeks.
And now we're at 3.
Oh, 2 weeks in a day. And then little by little, we started moving that deadline back. And honestly, you really don't have an argument with that. Those questions are supposed to be done when you're making your learning activity. So
Exactly.
there really isn't an excuse to not have the question in on time. And who are you hurting when you turn those in late? You're hurting the students because then the questions are not edited, they're not proofed by your peers, and they're rushed. And so there are a lot of mistakes on those questions. So all around, it's just giving us a lot of room for improvement there, or a lot of opportunities for improvement.
But importantly, one thing is we've also started a question review process. So there are faculty that resist the concept of point by serial, for example. And now there is a process that circles back after the exam to approach those faculty in a gentle way and sort of try and educate them, or at least understand where they're coming from, so that to improve their test questions in the future. And that's one way of quote-unquote standardizing the test questions, at least in terms of quality.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I think we have time for one more question. Last question is, how difficult or time-consuming was it to develop the web-based forms on SharePoint?
Took us 2 weeks.
It was about 2 weeks, right?
It took 2 weeks to do. We have a SharePoint expert on campus. I was able to do maybe 80% of the form.
The curriculum? No.
For the assessment.
The assessment.
No, the assessment. You taught me how to do SharePoint. You said, hey, Patty, this is the column. Yeah, I did all of it.
So there you go. So
we didn't even need
Scott's trying
Scott.
to steal her.
Scott's trying to steal my spotlight. So he isn't the genius. He's just evil.
So the curriculum map and those sort of things Like, I literally could go in and do 80% of the work, like, by myself. But there was that remaining 20%, like the mesh terms and stuff, that I wasn't able to do. So like Patty said, I was just able to direct her, say, hey, Patty, this is kind of how you do forms in SharePoint, and then she took it from there, and it took like 2 weeks. So it really wasn't hard at all, and that's why when I was looking at SharePoint, I realized that SharePoint allows people who aren't necessarily programmers to do incredibly sophisticated things with minimal effort. Patty is obviously very bright. She's not a coder, though, but she doesn't need to be. And she's, in fact, accomplished more than some of the coders here thanks to SharePoint and her own innate abilities and desire to create something amazing.
Right. I'm not sure if Patty mentioned, SharePoint is a Microsoft product, so we have a license for SharePoint here on our campus. And as Scott mentioned, the SharePoint expert that we can go to when we want to try to do something new, like the test bank or the item bank.
The test bank I did too.
You did. Good job for you, Patty.
Yeah.
It's easy.
It is. There are YouTube tutorials. There's lynda.com. I learned stuff off Lynda. And then what I did is I took the small things that I learned. Scott was like, hey, Patty, have you ever thought of, having the faculty submit using SharePoint? He showed me how to start a form. He showed me how to add columns. And then once I got it going and I had a small prototype, we had a little bit of success here with comms. And I was so excited about how efficient it made the process for me that I went to the other colleges and I said, hey guys, this is what we're doing. And I started a power users group for ExamSoft here on campus. So between the medical school, between the dental school, podiatry, the graduate college, pharmacy, I pulled them all together and I said, hey, this is working for me. I don't know if you guys want to use something similar to that. I gave them a little bit of instruction on how to make lists, and then we just started bouncing ideas off each other, and now we have this super sophisticated form, and we all use it differently because all of our processes are different. So some of them use an item bank, some of us don't. Some of us just post the item analysis,